From Washington, D.C. to the heart of America, welcome to Mark Alford's America. I'm freshman Congressman from Missouri, Mark Alford, and I believe in America. I believe in you. And most importantly, I believe that our greatest days are still ahead. You know, each week we take you behind the scenes to share the stories, the news, the legislation, and most importantly, to meet the great folks who are helping shape our great nation, the folks I work with day in and day out. And today we're talking with Congressman Morgan Luttrell. He represents the 8th District of Texas, just north of Houston. He earned his bachelor's degree from Sam Houston State University and then enlisted in the Navy. He was there 14 years. He survived a deadly helicopter crash, recovered with determination, and made it back to the front lines. He was a lieutenant in the Navy SEALs, retired from the Navy in 2014, and used his personal experiences to help fellow veterans recover from PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. Right now, he's on 3 committees in Congress: the House Armed Services Committee, I serve with him on that, the Committee on Homeland Security and on Veterans Affairs, and he serves as the Vice Chair of Border Security and Enforcement Subcommittee on Homeland Security. We're going to talk a lot about that. Please welcome to our office in Longworth, Congressman Morgan Luttrell. How's that for a build-up?
That was an amazing delivery. I hope I can carry the weight behind that introduction.
You've had how old are you?
I'm almost 50.
You don't look that old.
Thank you. I work out.
Yeah, I can tell. I work out. But you've had an amazing life so far.
It's been quite the journey. It has. I actually try to reflect on where I've been because I'm still trying to figure out what I would do when I grow up.
Right.
I really haven't put my finger on the pulse yet. I've been fortunate. My twin brother and I have made a heck of a life from start to finish, growing up in a small little country town on a horse ranch to academia to the military and to where I sit now in front of you as one of your freshman colleagues.
What town did you grow up in?
I grew up in Willis, Texas.
I know where Willis is. My parents used to live in Willis.
I think you told me that.
Yeah.
Which I don't know how anybody lands in Willis, Texas.
7 Coves.
Hey, I spend a lot of time. That's right there on the lake, so I can a lot of good times as a young man be bopping around 7 Coves. That was like the place to hang out.
So you and your brother were both in the military. What made you both decide to, or what made you decide to get into the military?
Almost every male in our lineage served in the military, as well as a lot of the females. So military service was just kind of that was the way we were raised. As far as my father was in the Navy, my grandfather was in the Army. You know, there wasn't specifically just Navy in our bloodline per se. And my brother and I saw a documentary when we were very young called The Silent Option. And it was about Navy SEALs. One of those documentaries where the guy had the most amazing voice and made the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It was like, this is the greatest thing ever. They were talking about leading edge, you were front line, going after the bad guys. And we put ourselves on that glide path and never really looked back. So inevitably, when I graduated, Marcus went through before I did. I actually I got hurt and I broke my leg in college real bad. So we had to separate for the first time in our lives. And then when I finally graduated, Marcus and I were the 5th set of identical twins ever to make it through SEAL training. I think there's been a few more since. And pretty elite fraternity. And that's inevitably how we went that direction. But back in those days, nobody knew what a SEAL was. There were rarely there was no literature per se, and just that documentary that Discovery Channel did was kind of the only thing anybody knew about it. But we knew that was for us, and it worked.
When you see, you spent time in Afghanistan.
Yes, sir.
Saw a lot of action there. When you see a couple of years ago what President Biden did, the way he pulled out of Afghanistan, what went through your mind when that happened?
I was just as frustrated as the American public was, but there's a deeper seed in there because we fought so hard for so long in that country trying to establish a footprint that was sustainable. And the Afghan people relied on us heavily, just the sheer infrastructure. And when the drawdown happened the way that it did, we were just kind of a mass exit. Hey, we're to see you later. That took the wind out of the proverbial sail. You think back, so my brother was in Afghanistan when everything happened to him, and we lost all of our teammates. We lost so many of our brothers and sisters over there. And it's closure is one thing. When you're engaged in combat, what does that look like? Hey, look, we're really putting foot to ass for country over here for a reason, and this is Morgan's opinion only, and to walk away the way that we did, where it's just kind of like throwing your hands up and say, "Hey, give me my basketball, I'm going home." That's still extremely hard to choke down.
Is that one of the reasons you ran for Congress?
There was multiple reasons I ran for Congress. I don't have any political background whatsoever. I was born and raised in my district, and my wife spent a lot of time on prayer and asking ourselves if this was the best course of action, because we knew we had to have a defensive and offensive posture here to represent those folks back home. If I was to put my finger on anything specific, the reason I'm up here for my kids and the reason I want to go home every day is because of my kids. The Afghanistan thing just kind of adds to the pile of frustration that we see when the line of communication up and down the chain of command is broken.
How do you fix that?
Voting has consequences. You have to, and I say that when you have a fracture, if you will, between the lower chamber, the upper chamber, and the House itself, the White House, and how it doesn't seem as we can communicate. It doesn't seem that we're on the same page when it comes to, hey, the wants and needs of the American people. And in order to fix that, in my opinion, you have to look past the silliness of the political diversity and look to the people to put into leadership positions and understand the overall mission is the success of the United States and the people that live in it. And when you have representation up here in Washington, D.C., either it's our chamber, the Senate, or the White House, you have to realize that if we don't communicate, the machine breaks down. And if the machine breaks down, the country breaks down. And in my opinion, we're way past the cogs being broken.
Do the generals get that? Because they come before our committee, Armed Services Committee in the House, and it seems like they're just speaking a different language, that they don't get what we see.
If you talk to, if I may.
Yes.
If you talk to leadership at any given level in the military, the language is different. And what I mean by that is you have operators on the front line trace with a weapon system to say, hey, this is what I'm seeing, feeling, and touching, and tasting, and smelling. And then that language is lifted up to the next level, the next level, the next level. And I hate to say this, but I think the bureaucracy of the political ugliness has infiltrated in higher leadership, and their actions are predicated off of that individual that's in charge of them. And if that person is adamantly against the appropriate kind of movement of our leadership, then it breaks down. So those individuals in the senior leadership positions that are sitting in front of us, when we ask them the pointed questions, they either say, well, I work for the privilege of the president. That's
right.
Not an answer. And that's not an answer that we need. But if there was a sergeant, a gunnery sergeant, or a first lieutenant, or a lieutenant sitting in front of you, and we were out on the front line, you ask them that question, you get a very direct answer. So all that being said is we don't get what we need out of the senior leadership because they answer for the privilege of the president. The president don't want them to say that. They're obligated because of the chain of command and our military structure not to do that. And that's terrible.
How do we rebuild patriotism in our country and encourage more young people to enlist?
I've done a good job about sharing the experiences that I've had around the world with my sons and my nieces and my nephews, and that if you're to break it out into my friends and family, we make sure that in mission trips, we travel over to the places that aren't associated with or aren't the United States, and let them see how bad it can actually get, what it's like not having running water, electricity, what it's like when a country is at a civil war. I haven't exposed my kids to a civil war. Let me walk that statement back. But we do share that with our children so they can appreciate what they have. And to rebuild patriotism in the United States, first and foremost, I think you need to get rid of social media, which, they'd probably hang me from the highest tree on that one. I think that's one of the most debilitating mechanisms that we have. But showing people how valuable what we have here as opposed to everywhere else, it's one of those things that, and I hate this, if you kind of roll the tape back and you see what brought the country together in a heartbeat, 9/11.
Right.
Which we don't need another 9/11 here, but it did that. When the Gulf War kicked off, we united.
Is it going to take something like that? Is it going to take the invasion of Taiwan or Putin invading Poland.
Even if Taiwan, even if that's over there. Everybody, no, if it doesn't hit you right in the face, you don't get it. And that's unfortunate. If you can appreciate what those, when I get back home, we have discussions about, hey, how do you feel about supporting Israel?
Right.
I'm like, hey, I support Israel 100%.
Right.
And like, why would you do that? I was like, when I fought in a war, I've seen dead children. I've seen dead women. I've seen what the bad can do to the good. And the United States is the big brother. People don't like to hear that, but we are.
We're chatting with Morgan Luttrell, brother here in Christ and a brother on the Hill. And when we come back, we're going to talk about psychedelics to be used to help treat post-traumatic stress disorder. Morgan's leading the charge on this along with Dan Crenshaw. We'll also talk about the border that is not secure and what we're doing to change that. You're listening to Mark Alford's America. Stay with us. Welcome back to Mark Alford's America, where we give you a behind-the-scenes look each week at Washington and sometimes in our district. We let you meet some of the great folks helping shape our nation. Today, we're talking with Congressman Morgan Luttrell of Texas. We mentioned a little bit about his time in Afghanistan. You suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, did you?
So, no, I do not. Never have. Let me be very clear on this, because some veterans do. I do not. I spent my entire career giving that crap to other people, and I was very good at it.
Yeah.
But I do not suffer from post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder, which are two very different.
Explain the difference.
So post-traumatic stress, and I'll keep it as simple as I possibly can. So post-traumatic stress is something that cognitively, when you're engaged with post-traumatic stress, that could be over a stressful event, a car wreck,
right,
or an argument with your wife where your stress levels are engaged. Okay, you're able to function in society. You're able to move through your day. You may have increased anxiety, increased depression, so on and so forth, but it's manageable. Now, post-traumatic stress disorder with the D is debilitating. And this is my frustration as a neuroscientist when I hear people say, I have post-traumatic stress disorder. No, you don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't be sitting here with me right now. The disorder causes an ability or inability to function properly in society. Those are the people that really are kind of caged, are dependent on either SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or some sort of, a narcotic or a pharma in order for them to function in a way where they can actually just continue to sustain their life, but not actively engage in a social environment.
And how did you get so knowledgeable in all this?
I have a graduate degree from the University of Texas in applied cognition and neuroscience, and actually started my PhD in cognitive neuroscience, focused on traumatic brain injury and cognitive instabilities in our veterans. I started that after I left the military because I had a traumatic brain injury from the helicopter crash. And so you have post-traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic stress, and then you have traumatic brain injury. Now, those three very severe issues are often misdiagnosed and are often brought together, but you have to treat each one of them differently. We see in the veteran community and our first responder space that a lot of times the guys and gals that have issues don't have post-traumatic stress. They have traumatic brain injury. And those symptomatic and cognitive issues run very parallel with each other, but you have to treat them differently. And over the time of the war, when post-traumatic stress disorder, if you will, our post-traumatic stress started to elevate in our veteran space, the D was added. It just was added to everything. So you'll talk to folks like, I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I personally, and I'll argue this all day long with every veteran I talk to, I've met one person that had post-traumatic stress disorder. One young lady, and I won't get into what happened to her, but she could not function at all. And they need to be treated completely different.
Are the treatments available now suitable? I assume not, because of the National Defense Authorization Act. Representative Dan Crenshaw, you were instrumental in this as well, in getting the Psychedelic Therapy to Save Lives Act included in. Tell me about that.
Yeah, very big on, huge supporter of psychedelic therapies. And it's funny too, because if you were sitting on the couch with me 5 years ago, I'd be like, no way, absolutely not. I'm adamantly against any kind of.
These are psilocybin mushrooms.
It can be anything from psilocybin to ketamine to ibogaine to ayahuasca to 5-MeO-DMT, plant-based medications. THC is part of that as well. All right, but I'm a very medicinal guy in my research and how I view this lane. And again, 5 years ago, I'd been like, absolutely not. But I did my research. I really dug into what these plant-based medications were doing in the healthcare space. Okay, because right now, when we do treat post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, any cognitive instability, a lot of times they go straight to opioids. And the opioid epidemic is killing us by the droves.
Right.
Now that the fentanyl problem is what it is, and these things are converging, the growth rate is exponential. And plant-based medications clean the slate, if you will, because the plant-based medications are non-addictive. The residual side effects are slim to none long-term. And it's the results that we're seeing. And the longitudinal studies aren't here just yet, but the short-term studies, what we're seeing is that it is greatly reducing post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder. It's greatly reducing the urge for alcohol and drug dependencies. It's greatly reducing the overactive stimulation of the brain that causes the issues with our veterans and first responders. Now, this will transcend the veteran space. We're focused in on our veterans right now because in the grand scheme, it's a very short pool. It's a smaller number. And the studies that we're seeing thus far are showing great results. I have actually gone through the plant-based medications. Matter of fact, it was the only time I've ever done any drug. I actually had to go overseas to do it. I went to Mexico. Again, I don't have post-traumatic stress, right? I went because I had hit a crossroad. The best way that I'd heard it phrased is I could not safe my weapon system and relax. Like I was constantly walking around in the red because of my previous experiences. And
from your brain injury.
You could add the brain injury in there. And I spent a lot of time after I got out of the military traveling the country to cognitive facilities and institutes of higher learning to fix what I had going on because there was no really kind of like answer. It's like, hey, where do you need to go? What is the proverbial tool you put in your toolbox to solve these issues? And what I found was you had to put multiple tools to engage and increase your quality of life and decrease your symptomatic issues. It's up. I mean, this is a very, very deep rabbit hole. But for me, I see the plant-based medications and the psychedelics a way to move our people away from the opioids, get the treatments and the therapies they need in a medicinal setting, and be good, and put all this behind us. This is, in my opinion, this is the next step of evolution that we need to take. Everybody's been very apprehensive, like, no, we're good to go. You know, even in the scientific space and the clinical space, they say, hey, look, you know, this is an effective means of treatment. Well, it's not. It's an addictive means of treatment. If you're on those opioids, it's causing a large number of individuals to take their lives. We need to get away from that nonsense. And I honestly think this is the next step.
So this act and the NDA will really supply grants for the DOD to do research on
they gave
this.
us, yeah, the Senate and the House agreed on $15 million, which is the DOD and institutes of higher learning to come together and move research where they actually touching people. It's not a report that's hanging on a wall. It's not a plaque on the shelf. You're literally touching the service members and the veterans and saying, okay, hey, look, this is the inclusion criteria. This is the efforts that we're going to take. We want to start to finish baseline to the end state. What does it look like?
You and I were at the border a couple of weeks ago. We saw firsthand Venezuelans come right there and try to cut the wire and cross over 11 of them as we're standing there. What is going on at the border? How serious is this problem?
So we're well past, I really don't even have the ability to articulate it in a way and define it in a way that people understand the overwhelming assault at the southern border. When we were down there, you can see how those coming from the south to the north, if they yell out the word Venezuela, you're good to go. Come across, here's your free pass, and you're done. Because my district is the landing zone for the masses that are coming across.
It'll stay 4-hour drive.
4-hour drive, not 4 hours, yeah. And it's because they'll hit Highway 10. They'll come right across, and that dumps you right in Houston. And they're living in Houston area. And what the frustrations of the people don't understand is that when you have, let's just say 10,000 people a day come into a small town in Eagle Pass, Texas, well, they got to eat. They take up places in the hospital. If they got children, they get all these things overwhelm the amount of money that these little bitty towns have. And then they'll go to the ranching areas and they'll cut their water lines. You know, they're still their vehicle. Not all of them, but they and when you have this amount, because Texas spent almost $1 billion on legal immigration last year, $1 billion. And then Oklahoma, Missouri, and New Mexico, I think, did the exact same thing. And then you hear when the cities up north, from Chicago to Denver and New York City, how they're saying, hey, look, we got 35,000 people here. We're overwhelmed. We need so many $1 billion to help us. 35,000 people, we get that in 2 weeks in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
So you can't tell me that, hey, you guys you have no way to sustain a livelihood of a city with 35,000 extra people when we've got millions coming in.
We could do a whole show on this, but we're out of time.
Yeah.
Morgan Luttrell, thank you so much.
Outstanding. I had a great blast, sir.
Before we leave, what do you like best about America?
What I like best about America, that I can wake up every single day and enjoy the freedoms that I can because of those that went before me to defend it.
Amen.
And you can't do that hardly anywhere else.
Hey, thanks, Morgan. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it, brother. Thanks for joining us for Mark Albert's America. We'll talk again next week. Until then, remember, folks, I believe in you. I believe that our best days are still ahead of us. And Morgan Luttrell, I believe in America.
Outstanding.